Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Civil Service World webinar on the theme of youth unemployment. Nearly 1 million people in the UK are not in education, employment, or training. And behind that figure are lives at risk of being held back before they have truly begun. Since Labour came to power, we have seen a flurry of announcements aimed at tackling this problem, but solving it is a hugely challenging task that requires genuine collaboration across government, business, and the voluntary sector, which is why I am so excited that joining us today for this very timely discussion, we have a stellar panel of experts, each of whom will be coming at the conversation from a slightly different angle. And they are Sarah Young, Director of Policy and External Affairs at the Youth Futures Foundation, Dr. Victoria Hanna, Deputy Director of Going Forward into Employment in the Cabinet Office, Sandra McNally, Professor of Economics at the University of Surrey and Director of the Education and Skills Programme at the Centre for Economic Performance at the LSE, and last but not least, Amy Crabb, Talent and Learning Director for Serco. And Serco are also the sponsor for today's event. So thank you very much to them for enabling this to happen. So I want to start the conversation with a little bit of scene setting. What's driving this problem? What's different now as opposed to other periods of high youth unemployment? Why does this issue matter so much? So Sarah, I'm going to come to you first. Can you help us understand who we're actually talking about? Which young people, what the data shows, and what's different about the challenge that we face today compared to, say, the post-2008 crisis?
Yes, thanks, Jess, and thanks so much for inviting me to have a conversation about this really important issue. So I think it's worth saying that the UK has a long-term challenge with having stubbornly high numbers of young people not earning and learning. It's not a new thing for us, but it is true to say that this challenge has been getting worse in recent years. So today we've got 957,000 young people not in education, work or training. That is equivalent to 1 in 8. And that has been getting worse over the last 3 years. So we've seen a 15% rise in that figure over the last 3 years. And as you mentioned, like behind these numbers are real young people. So if you peel this back, there is huge complexity and inequity when you look at the young people behind the numbers. So firstly, like where you live matters. There is lots of regional inequality. If you're in the northeast, Yorkshire and the Humber, in the East Midlands, you will find it harder to get work. There are higher numbers of young people looking for work there. Characteristics matter a lot. So, for example, if you've got special educational needs or development, you are twice as likely to be NEET. If you're care experienced, you're 3.5 times likely to be NEET. And if you haven't got a level 2 qualifications, those GCSEs, or if you're things like through justice experience, or if you're from a particular ethnic minority background, right, you know, Black Caribbean background, Pakistani, Bangladeshi background, you are more likely, unfortunately, to be NEET. And of course, what we see is often these factors overlay and multiply, and that builds up barriers even more for young people. And you're right to say the character of the challenge today is very different from when we look at it in previous decades. So if you look at the sort of 2008 financial crash time, most of those young people were unemployed, meaning that they were looking for work. They were actively looking for opportunities. When you look at the challenge today, you see this bulging, growing number of young people who we call inactive. And that means they're not actively looking, they're not often in touch with employment support, with JCP, with Universal Credit, and they're not engaging and they're not looking for work, education or employment, which is a huge new challenge that we see. And you know, why is this a problem? Obviously, there is the moral case, huge scarring effects on young people. But it's a huge, waste, a huge economic waste for us in our country. And just to sort of put that into perspective, if we look at our European neighbours And we always use the Netherlands as an example because they have the lowest rates in the OECD. So they have 1 in 20 young people not earning and learning compared to our 1 in 8. So if we were to work as they have and put concerted effort into this to drive down that number, if we were to match that rate there, that would be worth 86 billion to our economy, and it would mean over 500,000 young people would be earning and learning. So that would half the NEET rate. So the prize here really is great for all of us.
Thank you so much for that overview. And that's staggering, isn't it? 1 in 20 versus 1 in 8. So Sandra, I'm gonna come to you next. From your perspective, why is this issue so important?
I think Sarah has really outlined those issues really well. I would say, that the scarring effects of youth unemployment in terms of future wages and employment is not just current, it's even when they find jobs that has a future scarring effect. That's very well attested in the empirical literature. So it's not just people having opinions or saying it. It's empirically shown that that's the case. So it will have and has consequences on mental health and well-being. I mean, you might say that the problems of mental health are a reason why, one of the reasons why there is more need now than there used to be, and maybe we can come back to that at some point. But it's also the case that being unemployed is very strongly correlated with people's mental health. Like if you weren't in poor mental health to begin with, you can become very depressed about it, as you imagine later. That does have, wider social costs as well as the effects on young people themselves, sort of more macroeconomic consequences as well. And it has a very obvious consequences for public finances. I mean, people aren't working and therefore they're not paying any tax, and then the, benefits bill gets higher. So from lots of perspectives, it is a huge societal problem.
Thank you. Thanks, Sandra. So, Amy, I want to hear from you about the employer perspective. What does this all look like on the ground right now? And what feels different about the young people that you're seeing? And why does it matter for employers as well as for government?
Yeah, of course. So I think from an employer perspective, I think one thing that we do want to be really clear about is this is not a lack of motivation or ambition from young people. It is more of a system issue where the system's not really meeting young people where they are. We are seeing younger people come to us with more mental health challenges and also that lack of trust and confidence in the system as well. We're also seeing more of a fragmented education journey, and we're finding that a lot of young people are coming in with those less informal networks. So they might not have had that work experience, have those role models in their life to really understand that way of work. So what that really means for employers is we really need to challenge the way that we are recruiting and onboarding. Traditional recruitment won't work for everyone, and we need to really have a look at what we are doing, because if we continue the way that we are, we will absolutely miss the talent that is there. We launched recently the Believe in People campaign at Serco, which is all about investing in people, growing skills and giving those opportunities. So it's important for government, but equally it's important for employers to make sure that we're getting that talent to build that future-ready workforce.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Amy. And Victoria, I'm going to come to you for our next topic, which is we're going to look at what works, and we're going to look at lessons from the schemes that are getting it right. But is there anything you'd like to add on what you've just heard, or shall I just ask you the next question?
Let's go straight to the next question, because I really can build on what Amy said there, because absolutely we recognise in going forward into employment that traditional recruitment does not work and will not deliver you the results that you are looking for. I think it would probably be a little bit helpful for me to talk about who I am and how I'm representing the government right now.
Could you say something about the scheme? That would be, tell us what the scheme is.
Brilliant. So I'm here actually representing not government as policy, but government as an employer. So government employs around 481,000 people right now, and those roles span admin, policy, engineering, law, operational delivery. And the way that the civil service recruits is quite unusual. And I'm going to speak a little bit to the crowd here, because I know the audience will all think back into their minds to how they were recruited as a civil servant, what their recruiting experience was like, what it's like to recruit right now if you use the mainstream options in the civil service. And civil service recruitment is, I'm going to say, quirky. Let's use that language. And the reason it looks the way it looks, and it can feel like a bit of an exam, a verbal exam, a written exam to get in, is because actually how we recruit is embedded in legislation. It's called the recruitment principles, and it means that we must be seen to be fair and open, which is how the system has evolved to look the way it looks. However, we recognise that that traditional way, that way that's bound in law, does not work for everyone and will not access us all of the talent pools that we need to access if we want the civil service to look more like the society and the communities it serves and capture that knowledge, that input and that life experience. So we have what we call life chance recruitment. And what that means is we have specific permission to use exceptions to our recruitment principles if we can show that a particular group or a department can show that there is a barrier to employment, a barrier to access that has been manifested. And we can use exceptions. So we use exceptions 2 and 10, which I won't bore you about, but that's the technical stuff if people are really interested. So when we show that we need skills development, or we need to show, we need to give people meaningful stretching work for a period of time to increase their employability, we can pivot away from fair and open recruitment. We can actually pivot away from civil service jobs and use different channels to enter the civil service. And that's what going forward into employment does. We use our 2 special exceptions to create different pathways into the civil service. And right now there are 20 active pathways that you can use, many of which focus on young people. Not all. We have some groups, for example, people with convictions, veterans, many of which come under some characteristics of youth due to intersectionality, but we also have care leavers schemes, care experience schemes, and we have pathways that very much do focus on NEET as a category. And we would use our colleagues in DWP as delivery partners, people who can refer candidates into our schemes. And that is going forward into employment around 8 years. We've been working now, and we've grown from less than 1% of all civil service recruitment to the latest figures for the third quarter are 2.75% of all civil service recruitments at those junior grades go through these routes that are not traditional and focus on recruiting in a different way and accessing different kinds of communities to help us grow. So that's going forward into employment. What works for us? How do we thrive? Because we have been shown to thrive, we're growing. We focus on simplifying the job descriptions. We focus on working with partner organisations to find candidates, so people are referred into our schemes. We work with partners that can continue to support people, but we've also looked at what support we can put into place for candidates who are successful and who are recruited into the civil service through special buddies, through additional support for line managers to help support those candidates thrive and flourish, and also going forward, helping people build those networks that they don't necessarily have when they join the civil service, and ensuring that the civil service is a good employer and they know how to get the support that every civil servant benefits from. So that's some of the things we do. It's about the recruitment, it's about thinking about retention and development, and looking at how we can help people flourish. Because at the end of the day, just to repeat that point, these aren't statistics, these are people.
Yeah, that's worth restating, and thank you so much for that insight, Victoria. Amy, from the perspective of a private sector employee, employer, what are the non-negotiables for you if we're serious about creating quality opportunities for young people, regardless of what the scheme is or the label attached? What are your non-negotiables?
I think it all leads back to Victoria, what you just said, that these are people and not just statistics. So we have experience through Restart, where we've supported about 30,000 people get back into work. And we also have a Pathways programme where we're reaching people that are furthest away from the labour market. So people maybe with a criminal experience, the criminal justice system, or veterans. I think what we've found through both of these programmes is that the tailored support is absolutely a non-negotiable. We need to recognise that people have got different needs, and we need to be bespoke in how we are supporting them. The main thing that we've seen that really does work is that wraparound support. So how are we helping people beforehand? How are we helping them get an interview? So we have a guaranteed interview scheme for some of our areas, but then equally helping them with that interview. If they've not had previous work experience, they then might struggle on how do I answer the questions? How do I pull out those transferable skills? So it's about supporting them, but equally supporting our managers as well. So helping them understand how to really see the potential in someone and give them that opportunity. So really, I think access is absolutely a massive thing, but it's the quality of that access as well. If we're not delivering those great programs and placements, we run the risk of people just cycling in and out of work as well if they're not getting that great experience. So the program really needs to give someone that view of a future. And for an employer, I think our non-negotiable is that quality, but we need to recognise as well it doesn't have to be to give someone a job for life. Normally, just a step into employment is enough to help them get moving from there. So it's really having all of those, but that support, I would say, would be the main thing that we see as really non-negotiable to make these programmes work.
Great, thank you for that, Amy. And Sarah, I am going to come to you soon because I know that your organisation is quite literally the What Works Centre for youth employment. But before I do, Sandra, you, I think, have looked quite closely at some sector-based programmes in the US, Year Up, Perscholas and Quest. I'm probably saying those wrong. So what do they do that we don't? And is there anything from those schemes in America that we could plausibly transplant into the UK?
I think there are elements of what's just been discussed that are very similar to the sector workshop, sectoral work programs in the US. A really defining feature of these programs is that they look for where there is employer demand, where there is real prospects for people. So they're training the training for people for something in which there is demand and there are jobs, as opposed to active labour market policies, which are often focused on just getting people any kind of job. But it can leave people feeling very disheartened if the training doesn't actually lead to anything. So it's really going against that. I do think there are schemes like that in the UK. They're not as well evaluated as these other programs that have been subject to a JPAL review, and they show not just short-term benefits, but long-term benefits too. So many years later, 3, 4, 5, 9 years later, and some of them. So I think that would be something that would be great to see more. I mean, you might say, well, why do you have to have evaluation of that kind of caliber? Well, if there is, first of all, we know then what really does work, because these issues come up again and again and again. And secondly, if you're going to ask government for funding, it's important that there's real additionality and there's real benefits, because it is, after all, taxpayer money, and we need to find out whether it works or not. So I think that's something that I'd really like to see incorporated more into what we do, because I think there's lots of good things probably happening here, but we don't really know whether they have long-term impacts or not, because there will be, obviously not everybody is going to be benefiting from these programs either. But their employer involvement is key. The employer, in terms of guaranteed job interviews, sometimes guaranteed jobs too, but not forever, but for a time. The employer is very involved in the curriculum development, and the skills are credentialized, so it's not just that people get actual credentials, and they get wraparound support as well in terms of stipends and mentoring and things like that. The way in which these sector work programs operate are different in terms of their sectors and their duration and their emphasis on those different aspects. And there are some very good, if anybody is interested in finding out more, I'm very happy to direct them to reports that have give much more information about them and how they've been evaluated and what exactly they consist of. And certainly I found myself that, you know, you can also type them into AI and find out about them, because but it's really interesting, and I'm sure that there are things that can be applied here. Another important aspect is that they're not really they're the intermediaries that sort of run them. They are not directly government. They are non-profit organisations, and they're very at the heart of it. And they work, and employers are often very at the heart of it too. So the government is playing a facilitating role in terms of some funding help, but it's not really at the centre in the way that some of the schemes are run here. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for that, Sandra. And Sarah, I'm about to come to you on our kind of second formal topic, which is what government needs to do differently and how it can better join up. But would you like to come in on anything you've heard? I'm sure you would, about what works, and add any examples of your own.
Yeah, absolutely, and agree with everything that panelists have said, and yeah, violently agree with everything that Sandra has said, and you'd expect that from a what works centre, but I think it's important to make the point, like, the reason Youth Futures Foundation is a thing, like the reason we exist is because there has been a lack in this country of strong, robust evidence, you know, really like getting that evidence base right in the UK context. So we have lots of trials and interventions and things we are testing that have shown promise from abroad, but we are testing them in the UK context. But that takes time. It takes a few years. But all of our stuff is out in the field, and we can chat to anybody that would like to know more about that. The one thing I wanted to sort of pick up is that point about employer involvement in the system that Sandra made. And when you look at countries like the Netherlands, it's totally different, and the employers are so involved in the education, employment and skills system from the start in a way that's quite far away to how we think about it here. And one of the biggest interventions that has the best international evidence of showing that it can be impactful, particularly for marginalised young people getting into work, is apprenticeships. It shows that, you know, the ROI, if you put your investment in there and you make high quality apprenticeships and you can offer more of those for young people, that is the ticket. And what we've seen here, and you know, we believe this is a big driver to the high numbers of young people not in education, employment and training, is we've seen apprenticeships drop by thirds in this country, particularly since the introduction of the apprenticeship levy. We know young people's interest in apprenticeships is growing, it's higher, that awareness is growing, but they can't access them. There is not enough, and particularly at level 2, level 3, there's been a real narrowing of that in the last few years. But as I say, if you look at the evidence, if you look at what's in our evidence toolkit, you will see that is, you know, if we were recommending things, that would be where you put your investment and your bucks. And it's been great to see that government have started to think about how do you meaningfully tilt that system towards young people? How can you help employers create more? But we will need to do a lot more if we want to reverse that trend.
Great, thank you. And yeah, so our sort of second informal topic or talking point is called joining it up. What government needs to do differently, and I suppose it's a focus really on collaborating better. And Sarah, one of the things that came through from our preparation call for this event is that the current landscape can feel very fragmented, and that employers are enthusiastic, but they're also confused about how to navigate it. So what does government need to do to make it easier? And do the various different programmes all aimed at tackling this problem, do they need to coordinate better amongst themselves? Or do they need to collaborate better with business? Any insight you've got there would be much appreciated.
Yeah, sure. So I guess first of all, I think that the way that government has gone about the youth guarantee has been so refreshing, and there has been some some real genuine join up between DWP and DFE in particular. And having worked in this game for sort of over 15 years in this sort of space, I've rarely seen this sort of collaboration, this great collaboration where you've got civil servants from each side having a meaningful conversation with stakeholders. So I just want to call that out as something that's been so positive, and you can see it in the design of the scheme. And I think that's what the youth guarantee is trying to do, is give a much better, more seamless journey for that young person through the system. And what it's starting to do is plug in interventions in that system, looking at the evidence base for that, which is a real positive thing. But there is more to do. And on that join up point, the thing that will make this fly is employers being able to offer these opportunities through the guarantee. So being able to offer the work placements, the jobs guarantee, getting employers to take advantage of some of the subsidies on offer. And I think from an employer perspective, some of the things that we're hearing is just needing to understand a bit more about how all this fits together. And I think government can sometimes be guilty of, asking employers to do lots of things from different parts of government, different angles. And from an employer perspective, what they're hearing is, okay, so you want me to do work experience in schools, and you want me to do T-levels, okay, and now you want me to do a lot of these things on the youth guarantee, and okay, but hang on, not all of them are starting at the same time, not all of them are available yet. From an employer's perspective, what they tell us is they need to have a plan thinking about their future workforce and how to plug in and do this meaningfully as a strategic approach, not sort of, can you do this bit here, can you do that bit there? And so I think there's a real positive story for the government to tell here, and there's some real benefits for employers. Like, if you look at the incentives in the youth guarantee, there's opportunities, I think, to stack some of these. There's opportunities to think how you might pull that money and do something, really great as an employer. But some of that stuff isn't out there yet. I think government's playing a bit of catch up on how you make that narrative work for employers, and then how it can get to the point where you can practically say to an employer, this is how you plug it in. These are all the opportunities. This is how you could use it to your advantage. And this is what you're going to get in return. And this is how you're going to help plug this great challenge whilst building your talent pipeline.
Great, thank you for that, Sarah. And I should add that it's a shame that we were going to have someone from the Youth Guarantee team on this webinar, on the panel, but we just couldn't make the diaries, the timings work. So that's a shame. But I would also encourage anyone listening from the DWP and all of you, regardless of department or organisation, to get your questions in. I should have said this at the top, but I missed it out. We are planning to have a bit of a Q&A session in about 15 minutes time. So if you've got any questions for the panel, then do get them in, and you can also upvote each other's questions if you see something that someone has asked that you would like to hear answered. So Victoria, I'm going to come to you now. From inside the Cabinet Office, what does joined up government actually look like in practice on this agenda, and where do you think the remaining gaps still are? Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. That's a great question. There had to be one, didn't there?
Yeah. There's always one. Yeah.
I took that one for the team. I think that's a great question, and I think the challenge for government lies within its size, actually, and working out what it does as a policy leader and what it does as an employer. Some of the complexity is there are around 44 departments, another 400 agencies and departmental bodies. So actually, setting a norm and being a role model employee is a challenge, but I do think it's one that's recognised. I think the Prime Minister has written out to Cabinet Office this week, and Cabinet Office being a corporate centre of the civil service, and the focus is on various policy leads, but actually internally on stripping back bureaucracy, on looking at controls, on looking at where we should be leading and where we should be working with one another. And I would say a leading characteristic of the current administration is the history of the ministers and the leaders that are driving change. There is a strong background of people coming from the wider public sector, from council leaders, charity leaders, those that have been involved in frontline in wanting, in developing the manifesto that has now become government missions. So I think it's challenging because the system is complex, but changes are occurring. There is far more outreach, far more focus now on working with the public sector as opposed to directing the wider public sector. And I think I would observe that we're partway through an administration, and it's at that point where speed does start to be seen to pick up. Hence, with the announcements this week from Pat McFadden and Georgia Gould, who were indeed formerly Cabinet Office ministers and then moved across into DfE and DWP, but maintained that joint focus. More of that is occurring, and so we can expect to see more change manifesting, but it is a slow journey, I would acknowledge that. But complexity does simplify. We just keep working on it.
Thank you, Victoria. And Sandra, I'm going to come to you next. And this might be more of a kind of, you might be asking the question rather than having all the answers. But I know you think a lot about the mental health angle, and we mentioned that at the top, how that is that's one of the things that feels different in this era of youth unemployment. And I know you think about how existing schemes can support people who are genuinely unwell. Did you want to add anything or ask the fellow panelists anything about mental health?
Yeah, I did this as a question, as you say. I don't have the answers. All these different things that are happening to try and help youth unemployment back, like the jobs guarantee and wage subsidies and more flexibility around apprenticeships, all of that is all very well. But we see a lot of the people who are NEET are not looking for work because of mental health problems, and there is no work search requirement. So where is the Department of Health in this? Where is their efforts to try to tackle the reasons why people aren't looking for work? Because making it easier for employers to employ them is only part of the answer, especially if they're not even looking for work in the first place because of mental health problems. Now, it may be just very difficult not to crack, and maybe there's a group of young people who are easier to get into employment than those people. But it would be nice to see that issue specifically addressed, because that's something that's different from previous times. So I'm interested if anybody has anything going on. Maybe there's lots of thinking going on about this, and I simply don't know.
Would anyone else like to come in on the mental health and whether there is sufficient join up with the Department of Health, or what works in other countries? I'll just or maybe that is one for. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Have I frozen? No. Okay. Yeah, perhaps we should get someone from the DH on the panel next time. Or if anyone tuning in from the DWP knows of join up over mental health and employment, they want to come in the comments, then they're more than welcome. So I wanted to ask Amy, from your perspective and from Serco's perspective, Amy, what do you? Oh no, I think I've got here, what do you need from government to create quality opportunities at scale, and what does collaboration between the public and the private sector look like in practice? What does good collaboration look like?
Thank you. So I would really lean into the points that Sarah made, actually. I think we have had some brilliant positive movement recently. But what we really need from government is that clarity. So these schemes are all great, but often for an employer, they can be confusing, and that confusion and complexity can really slow us down. So what we've seen is that we really want to help solve this issue, but we need those clear ways that we can help. One thing we definitely need to do, which Sarah's mentioned, is that joined up pathways. I think at the moment it's harder for an employer to meet a younger person at a younger stage in education setting. We're really meeting them too late. So how do we meet them earlier and really support them at a younger age? And that will really help them then get into the labour market. I think we also need to look at how we approach young people as well. We are looking at the moment as part of our restart scheme to do some more trials in areas like our leisure centres. So how do we really speak to people in a really non-threatening environment that seems accessible? So really meeting employers where they are. So I think the government really needs to think about what the challenges they're facing and how can we make it accessible. Another point that I would like to make is, especially for us, quite a lot of our recruitment is really kind of born out of what the contract needs are. So I think the government really need to look at when they're bidding for work or working with partners, how do they really bake some of these targets about youth and employment into their tenders that we are doing to really give those opportunities to young people. I think that's really important. And then my final bit on this is it's about how do we continue to work together. So that good collaboration is really how do we continue to share experiences. We're not going to get this right straight away, and it's not going to be a problem solved overnight, but it can't be a handover from government to employers to solve. It's something that we need to work together. And then when we really get that funding, policy and delivery aligned, that's when we can really make those opportunities happen.
Great, thank you, Amy. And I can see lots of audience questions coming in, so thank you very much. And we will definitely leave time to get to some of those. Amy, I wanted to ask you, obviously, we've talked a lot about the youth guarantee, and that and apprenticeships generally are positioned as the kind of centerpieces of the response to youth unemployment. Based on what you're seeing, where do apprenticeships genuinely work well for young people, and are there gaps or risks if we rely on them too heavily?
Yeah, so apprenticeships are really strong when they're done well. And when I say done well, I mean that they really link to the role that the young people want to do. They have a really great curriculum as part of it as well, and they receive that support. I think they will be a key part of really solving youth and employment. I think the risk that we have is treating it as the answer rather than part of the answer. We need to recognise that young people all have different needs, aspirations, requirement of support. So what we really need to be doing is looking at what are those multiple entry points into work for people, and apprenticeships might be one of those, but equally might not be right for someone else. So it's the timeliness and readiness of the young person that matters also. So really do think they will be brilliant and part of that solution, but there is a risk that we go too heavily on it and see it as actually that will solve everything. It just needs to be part of what we are doing.
Yeah, I'd like to come in and absolutely endorse that position. Our experience is that you can go too fast and too early with apprenticeships, and that they, while they do fire up some groups, actually they're a source of apprehension and nervousness to other groups. And I'd also make the point that there is more than one way to develop skills. So actually an apprenticeship might not be the right approach. It might be looking more widely, first at softer skills and employability skills, and then layering in, once the individual is more secure in what they want to do and where their strengths lie, then layering in further development opportunities, which could be an apprenticeship or it could be something else. But again, it's thinking of this person as an individual, and what it takes for them to flourish, rather than thinking that we all know that one size never fits all, but sometimes in our rush to take advantage of funding and opportunity, we can move a little too fast.
And Sandra, I'm going to come to you quickly, because I think that probably chimes with some of your thinking about apprenticeships and how their rigor and their intensiveness is actually a good thing, and how they shouldn't be sort of watered down. But don't want to put words in your mouth. So any thoughts about apprenticeships?
Yeah, I have very strong views about this. Apprenticeships are usually quite protected in countries, except in ours. And they're supposed to be serious work and classroom-based study, long term. And the previous government, they did try to make that more of a real thing. And if you're going to say people there's a choice between academic education and vocational education, where apprenticeship is extremely good, you kind of have to, you know, your actions have to follow that. And instead we see work-based training, vocational training, turned into an apprenticeship unit or a foundational apprenticeship, and lots of things with the word apprenticeship tied on. Now, I hope it doesn't matter, and that's an empirical question, but I do object to the branding of everything as an apprenticeship. And I do think that, yes, the landscape is complex, but the landscape for employers is the landscape is complex everywhere in the tax system and lots of areas of our lives. There's complexity, and you do need to have you know, sources that you can go to that can help you navigate that and help you decide what are the right things, what are the right ways to put your personal investments in, for example. And the answer isn't only to have one product. You can have many products, but people have to understand those things. And I think that's where the government there's a really big role for government in doing that. But I really think that labeling things as apprenticeships that are not apprenticeships is very disingenuous. So.
Thank you for that. And Sarah, before we move on to our Q&A section, do you have any thoughts about apprenticeships?
Yes, and again, agree with the points that have been made. And when I talked about needing more apprenticeships earlier and ways you back them, I'm talking about the evidence of how Sandra's described them there as what you consider as a traditional apprenticeship with high standards, with a certain length of training, with classroom based. So that is really important. It is about how you boost more numbers, but how you keep the quality high. I think foundation apprenticeships are an interesting idea. They're an unproven idea, but they're interesting, and I guess we'll have to see what that looks like. But from another country's standard, they wouldn't count that, I think, as an apprenticeship. But that's not to say they won't be helpful. It's just we don't know yet. But I guess to summarise, the evidence, you know, would tell us that we should invest more in apprenticeships. I think we've got a lot more to do here. We made a bit of a start with tilting it, but it's about where the policy can go next for this and the youth guarantee as a whole.
Thank you for that. Okay, so I think we're going to move into our Q&A section now. We've had some brilliant questions, and one is actually something that I wanted to know about as well, so I'm going to ask it first. Do you think the government needs to do more to incentivize businesses choosing to hire young people or apprentices or entry-level roles? Businesses seem to be replacing entry-level roles with AI tools where the costs, at least for now, are relatively low. And obviously this is not a webinar about AI, but I am interested in, you know, in AI's impact on those entry-level jobs, and obviously that won't apply to a kind of more traditional vocations, kind of using other skills, but for those administrative entry-level jobs, does the panel think that I suppose businesses need to be incentivized more to choose young humans over chatbots? Anyone can come in on that.
I'm happy to take this one. I think the new incentives they've just talked about and released are absolutely brilliant. So I think that will really support employers to think differently about their recruitment strategies going forward and really give more opportunities. In terms of AI, we haven't seen this yet, that it is really taking those lower level jobs. I think we need to recognise that AI is going to change the way that we work, and I do think it may take some roles, but equally I think it's a great opportunity to create more as well. So I don't think it is something that we are seeing it impacting at the moment, and I think the new incentives will really support employers to think differently about their recruitment and hopefully give more opportunities to people as well.
Anyone else want to come in on AI quickly?
Sorry, go on, Sandra.
Well, I mean, the the existence of AI just shows why it's important to have many, to educate people in skills that are going to be complementary to AI, that are going to be able to use. If AI does replace some of their tasks, that they're equipped to then move to other sorts of tasks as well. So that's why you need to embed in your training these employability skills that include, teamwork, social skills, communication, and those sorts of skills as well. And that speaks for perhaps slightly longer training rather than having very targeted training. For young people, now it's different when people are looking to upskill in later life. Maybe it does need to be more targeted then. But for young people entering the labour market and preparing for a career, you really need training that is going to be multifaceted, partly because of the risks that AI presents. But it does present opportunities as well. And this is something we don't know yet because it isn't really embedded enough in the labour market yet to see what's going to happen.
Thank you.
I was going to say I'd concur with that. I think there's an element of AI reshapes roles, and it does look at changing the skill sets, but it also gives an opportunity for human input at a more elevated level. So we mustn't forget the opportunity without thinking about the challenges that sit alongside it.
Thank you, Victoria. So I'm going to do that thing that chairs sometimes do, where they ask two questions at once, maybe just to save time. And I think, Sarah, you've expressed interest in these two questions, so I might put them both to you. Obviously, they're different, but so the first one: how much do you consider local labour markets in the design of assistance schemes? And are all the schemes on a national level, or are you targeting by region, etc.? And then the second question is, can we make job centres, job and wellness, or sort of mental health centres integrate the support in one place? Also, to some job centres give autonomy and resources to make small laboratories or groups inside these job centres to address these issues. So, Sarah, I'm gonna ask you those two first.
Sure. So both are good ways to go. So, and again, if you look at other countries that do this better with us, there a strong feature is very strong local skin in the game as well as national skin in the game. And that local tailoring element is really important. Like we know that that's what helps in system design. And again, that integrated support, that more wraparound support for a young person is really important. And I think that there are a couple of opportunities here in where policy is at present within the youth guarantee. So the youth guarantee trailblazers within the youth guarantee, they are in their individual areas testing this kind of locally led different projects, looking at their sort of local populations and innovative things that might work. What I will point out is there's only 8 of them, and there's a case there about if you're going to take the youth guarantee to the next level, what does that rollout potentially look like? On that sort of integrated service point, again, some of the trailblazers are testing this. I'm very involved in the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough trailblazer, who's doing some really interesting stuff, thinking about mental health services and referral from the mental health side and the sort of employment side to each other. And then the final thing I'd say within the youth guarantee is you've got the expansion of youth employment hubs as an alternative front door to a traditional JCP. We've done research on this, and we know that young people prefer that more sort of co-located services type space. It feels friendlier, it feels more youth friendly. Again, the timetable to roll those out, like I'd advocate for that being sped up. Where they have been rolled out, they've, I think, been really successful. Feedback's been really good. And the idea of that is that you can co-locate some of these other services. You can point young people to other places. And just finally, key in this, I think, is, and where we really need join up, is thinking about the youth services space with employment, education and labour market. So DCMS has a huge role to play in this alongside other departments, because to get to inactive young people, you need to engage them back in the system. And the people that can do that best are people who can do outreach, and that is often local people in your community that know those young people, can find out what's going on, can re-engage them in these types of services. So there's opportunities for things like Young Futures hubs on the DCMS side and youth employment hubs. And we'd love to see how those things could join up and integrate so that we're not talking at cross purposes.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Does anyone else want to come in on either of those questions? Or I could ask the next question, which is from somebody who works in a job centre. I'm just trying to find it now. As somebody that interacts with young people at the job centre regularly, what changes can I make in my day-to-day to support them as well as I can? I think that's a lovely question. Would anyone like to come in on that?
Happy to, if no one else wants to, but don't want to hog. I suppose I'd go back to just what young people say, and look, a big part of our work is having young people's voices at the forefront. We provide the sort of young person advisory forum to the Youth Guarantee and to and to sort of the Milburn Review. And I think from a young person's perspective, what they say is they do want a conversation that feels joined up with other things and other services other things that are going on in their life. Because for a young person to feel ready for work, actually, what might feel further at the front is housing, or is health, or is other stuff which are enablers to work. And so I think it's that knowledge about what other services are out there, a bit of sometimes can you help that young person to join up, and a bit of also just how do you make it youth friendly? How do you get a bit more into a young person's mindset? How do you make them feel like you are really understanding their personal circumstances and what might work for them?
Thank you very much for that. And we've had a question about school absence. I'm interested in how this all ties into work around reducing school absence. Is that a risk factor, and can we join up policy better to improve outcomes in both areas? I suppose we need someone from the DFE on the panel as well. But,
I mean, I suspect the two are linked.
Yeah.
You know, the school absences increase has been, well, since COVID really. It's been since COVID, caused by stuff in COVID, and it's still with us. And I'm imagining that some of the problems that we see, maybe not all of them, but some of them later on, is from that too. So that they are related to one another. Quite how you kind of have policies that, I mean, probably you need different policies to address the different things, because people are at different stages and they're exposed to different services at that point. But I suppose if you were to effectively address absences at school, you would probably reduce needs as well later. So they are linked in that way for the future. It doesn't help people, of course, who've left school already, but it would help people who are currently in school.
I would agree with that, sorry. Because like if you look at what's the biggest predictor to a young person not being in education, employment, training, it is attainment. Like it's still, that's the thing that will probably tell you what's going to happen most to a young person. So not achieving that level 2. And if you're absent from school, then you're not learning, so you're not achieving. So there is this very clear link. And again, what I'd come back to there is the need for that joined up services, because who's going to help engage a young person back into school? And it probably is thinking more about your youth services and your health service combined with education to get that young person back into education.
Great. And we've had a couple of questions about local labour markets and what part they play in the design of assistance schemes. And Victoria, I'm going to come to you on that. How does the location affect these schemes?
It's a critical part of it, and it's part of also government ambition. So I talked earlier about the size of the civil service, but also the shape of it is changing as well. So the government has announced by 2030, for example, that 50% of senior leaders in the civil service will be outside of London. But also, it has announced that it's going to be focusing its growth in recruitment and its shaping of where departments are based and how they hubs in 15 centres across the UK. So, for example, Greater Manchester, York, Leeds, Birmingham, I'm hoping I remember them all, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Belfast, Bristol, Cardiff, Sheffield, and Darlington. And the last one is Newcastle, where I have many colleagues based in recruitment. And those sites will be hubs for departments, and departments have specialties. So, for example, if we think about Birmingham, where I am based, that's the Department for Transport. And there's an emphasis there on growing that particular department and the specialisms and knowledge that goes there. This week, actually, it was announced that Greater Manchester will be our IT hub. And again, that will shape what recruitment looks like in those places, and also what life chance recruitment looks like in those places, on the kinds of partners that we focused on, or that we focus on working with. I only touched on it sort of very lightly at the beginning, but our recruitment model, remember, is different. We don't use civil service jobs. We don't advertise. We work with partners who are based in a region, who know the region, who are working with people in that region, and they refer people into us who can then see the roles that we have ring-fenced for application from groups that are facing barriers. So I think that sort of helps, that nuance helps us understand how, as an employer, the civil service will change and grow in the regions, and how it will be seeking more partners in the region, particularly ones that can speak to the education needs and the development needs that particular departments will need if they want to shape their talent pool in that region as well.
And Sandra, do you want to come in quickly on kind of regional thinking, place-based thinking?
I mean, the sectoral training programs I talked about earlier are always place-based, because if you're going to link up employer demand with supply, it's a place-based issue. So I think that it's very important to think exactly like that. It's not the national policy set the framework, but you have to think in place as well. And then the adult education budget is devolved, so that is something that places do have to decide how to spend it, to use it. So, and that's 19 plus, people age 19 plus. So there has to be place-based thinking about all these policies. It's really important.
Thank you very much for that. And we are almost at the end of our time now. So I'm going to ask each of you for a closing thought. What is the one thing that you most want people listening today to take away from the conversation? And Sarah, I'm going to come to you first.
That the situation is not inevitable. You look at the Dutch, they used to have a NEET rate that was more similar to us. They have, with sustained investment, concentration, good join up across government and ambition, significantly reduced their NEET rates. We can do it here. We can do much better. We know enough about what works. We've got a lot more to learn, but we know enough now to make really good policy choices and good investment choices. We just need the will. So I hope the iteration of the youth guarantee continues to grow, and hopefully the Milburn review brings a lot of value to that to build on the direction further.
Thank you very much. And Sandra, what would be your one key takeaway for people tuning in?
It's hard to pin it down to one. I suppose I would say it's good to have lots of different schemes. I don't think that in itself is a problem, but you do need to have, I don't know, like a Martin Lewis for thinking about different schemes, rather than say, well, there's too much. And I think it's important to embed evaluation into the thinking of all of these things, so that we learn collectively what works in the UK.
Well, they made James Timpson a minister. Maybe Martin Lewis will join government one day. Victoria, any closing thoughts? Oh, you're on mute again.
Again, my goodness. It was because I'm smiling thinking about what I want people to think about. I actually take a moment and think back now to the last time you recruited. I also want you to think that with what we've heard about youth employment today and that how recruiting makes such a difference. So next time you recruit, think about life chance recruitment, think about doing it differently. And if you have any questions, never hesitate to ask, because we could be the way that you make a fundamental difference in someone's life.
Thank you very much for that. And finally, Amy, what are your closing reflections?
So I would agree that youth in employment is absolutely solvable. So it's something we can work together on. I think Serco's Believe in People campaign is really important here. So as long as we believe is that everyone has that potential and can have that opportunity, we can really change lives. And if employers and government continue to work together for that shared outcome, we're not just going to give people jobs, we will build futures.
That is a lovely note to end on. Thank you so much, Amy. Well, it's been a fascinating and really wide-ranging discussion this morning. And all that remains for me to say is a huge thank you to our fantastic all-female panel. We didn't even get a token man. So yeah, thank you, Amy, Victoria, Sarah, and Sandra. It's been so interesting to hear your insights. And thanks to all of you for tuning in and asking your questions. I do hope you got some value out of it. That is all we have time for, unfortunately. It's been such a pleasure. So thank you to everyone again for making this happen, and we hope to see you soon. Bye.